here. So, HADJE, first of all, HADJE, on behalf of Team Gnosis, we heartily welcome you, and it's an absolute pleasure and honor to have you today. And just to give you a brief introduction about our lecture series, this is the 12th lecture of our lecture series, Gnosis lecture series. We started our journey from 7th of May, from 17th of May, and we intend to continue it till 10th of June. We'll be having at least 25 lectures. So
wow.
The series we are having where speakers from all over the world, our country, our senior professors, and from different parts of the world will be joining us, will be enlightening us from time to time. And yours lecture is the 12th lecture. Your abstract had already been sent to all the participants who have joined the lecture. So I'm sure some of them might have read the abstract also of yours, and they are ready with their, they are keenly waiting for you to speak. Just a brief introduction of Sadje, I would just like to share with my participants. He is a very young budding scholar, and he basically hails from Philippines, and now he is in Belgium, and he's associated with in this course of time, in this course of research, he's associated with various organizations. I'll just give you an idea of his associations. He has been working with the various professional and faith-based organizations, including Christians, the Peacemaker Team, Caritas Brussels, and Peace Builders Community Mindanao, Philippines. So these are the associations, and apart from that, the lecture that he'll be delivering, I have already shared. The topic of his lecture is, Can the Non-Western Think Theologically? Exploring the epistemic disobedience as a process of emancipating from the house of white supremacy knowledge. So basically, HADJE belongs to the school of decolonizers, and we already had 2 decolonizers HADJE. And I would also place on record, I would like to thank Dr. Sayan Day for creating. Dr. Sayan Day has acted as a bridge between me and HADJE. It is Dr. Sayan Day. Credit goes to him for arranging HADJE's lecture today with us. And we already had 2 decolonizers HADJE you might be aware of. One is Dr. Sayan Day, the other is Lesa Molloy, and the third in the line is you. And I am very hopeful there are few more who is in the line. So although we don't want to categorize Gnosis lecture series in a particular categorization because we have plethora and variety of topics, but yes, decolonization and African literature, there are speakers majority, I would say. So without wasting much time, HADJE, just to give you an idea, we already have 175 people who have joined us, and that will go to at least 250, that's for sure. Without much time, HADJE, the platform is all yours. Please carry on.
Thank you very much for this great opportunity. I think I can share the screen now, no?
Just a second.
Okay.
Yes, you can.
Yeah. Good afternoon from Belgium, and I'm so proud and honored to be part of this project. And thank you for this professor. How do you pronounce your Banerjee?
Banerjee.
Banerjee. Yeah, Dr. Banerjee. I'm so pleased and honored to be part of this
Pleasure's
project.
All mine and entire team Gnosis.
Oh yeah, the entire team. Thank you very much in advance. I'm so quite nervous because I know that India, in terms of scholarship, in post-colonial and decolonial studies, you are very, very advanced compared to the Philippine context. But I will try my best because this is also part of my PhD project, as I mentioned to Professor Banerjee. Okay. Okay. Did you already see now the screen, right?
Yes, it's clearly visible. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now I have this proposed outline. Okay. Oh, it's not working. I think I need to. Mhm. Okay, now this is my proposed outline for you. First, I would like to share my context, because I also strongly agree with Professor Day that the concept or the practice of decoloniality is always a start from you as individual before projecting it to the other. So I will start with my context, my personal journey as a student of decoloniality. And then I will share to you my work in the World Council of Churches, or IAPI, which is known for social advocacy and justice within the West Bank territories, or the Palestinian territories, which is occupied until now by the state of Israel. Then the third one is the post-colonization. I'm using the term of Professor Day, and some reflection about what is actually happening now in the Philippines when it comes to post-colonial and decolonial scholarship. Then I will go to the last part of my presentation, would be decoloniality, and going straight to the concept of epistemic disobedience slash or epistemic insurrection. Then we will going to have a question and answer part. And first, I was baptized by conservative classical Pentecostal groups in the Philippines. If I think some of you are familiar with this organization, they are basically based in the US. They are very, very strong Pentecostal, classical Pentecostalism, because Pentecostalism is a Christian religious group. Uh, it is an offshoot charismatic group coming out from the mainline Protestant or Evangelical, Baptist, Methodist, etc., etc. So, historically speaking, this organization, our organization, has a history of white supremacy or racism. Why? Because this organization was originally part of what they call the Pentecostal Assembly of World in the US. But this Pentecostal Assembly of World was established by the black community in the US. Then eventually, they broke up because they cannot sit together and listen to the black preachers. So they form the another Pentecostal group in America, and they call it the United Pentecostal International. Then another thing is the UPC is non-Trinitarian Christian organization. They are not Trinitarian Christianity. Basically, we claim that we are the Apostolic Oneness Pentecostal Church. And aside from that, UPC is the largest Oneness Pentecostals, not only in America, but also in the Philippines. Basically, they are white leadership, as I mentioned, and most of the non-white people are under their authority or ministry. So I was disillusioned when I was involved in the ministerial work. I find nepotism. I discover sexual abuses, and they try to hide it. I saw corruption, money involved. I saw abuse of power. They have this religious model of leadership, authoritarian, pattern from the Old Testament concept of the God, the angry God, etc. Now, basically, this is the current leadership of the United Pentecostal Church. So they are very powerful. The General Superintendent of the United Pentecostal Church are also lawyer and also a theologian, a well-known Oneness Pentecostal theologian. So one of the identity of the Oneness Pentecostal churches, women, they don't cut their hairs. Okay? So basically that is, for them, is theologically, biblically sound teaching. And when I was invited, because before this organization, theologically, they are very, very pro-American, pro-State of Israel. They view Israel, the modern State of Israel, as the chosen remnant of Abraham, of David. But eventually, I was challenged by one of the member of the National Council of the Philippines, and they invited me to come and to join in this program under the World Council of Churches. We call it the Ecumenical Accompaniment Program in Palestine and Israel. Then this is where I develop the consciousness. I become critical. I become conscious of the word post-colonialization, because I realized that there's something wrong. I feel that there were issues unaddressed by my theology. So basically, the IAPI, we call it IAPI in short, was created in 2002 in response to the demand of the local indigenous Palestinians, Christian, Muslim Palestinians, including Jewish activists, to invite international Christian community or global community to observe what is really happening in Israel/Palestine. So basically, this is what the IAPI are doing in Palestine or Israel. So I don't need to mention that in details, because we have a lot of slides here. So first, I was struck by the realities of the West Bank/Palestine territory. Despite that it is a Palestinian territories, it was occupied by the State of Israel. They built illegal walls defined by United Nations and International Court of Justice. I saw occupation, military occupation. I saw the State of Israel and also the global community, the Christian community, and lobbyists, Jewish millionaires, companies, global companies funded to rebuild a settlement inside of Palestinian territories. And this settlers, illegal settlement, is protected by the illegal borders, as you saw here in the slides. Now, if you look in the history, I discovered that this occupation started from 1948 or 1946, when, especially 1948, it was intensified because of the so-called ethnic cleansing. So I was shocked. These realities break my heart. I question my faith. I question the dogma that I received. Then I start to think an alternative theological response or theological thinking that will not justify this kind of military and modern occupation. Also, aside from this, I was also surprised the abuse and the brutal nature of this occupation. They're not just simply occupying lands, they're also arresting Palestinian minors and detain them illegally. And this is based on the Israel Information Center for Human Rights, which is a Jewish group activist based in Israel. And I saw this scenario every day during when I do voluntary work in the West Bank. I saw this every day. Then I encountered this book by Ilan Pappé, who is a famous, prestigious, modern Israeli scholar and historian. I questioned my faith. Why my Christian faith justify racism and killing? Like what this the self-proclaimed rabbi of Jerusalem. He said that as soon as the attacker knows that if he comes with a knife, he won't return alive. It will deter them, the Palestinian. That's why it is religious commandment to kill him. This is one this is and why racism is acceptable and violence is justified by my Christian tradition. Then I explore and I joined with a group in the Philippines. It was only established, newly established groups in the group in the Philippines. We call ourselves are the project, or actually it was this program basically is a part of the University of the Philippines Diliman Decolonial Studies program. And the pioneer of this program is a Filipino named Nazep Adyong, one of the founder of this group. Then I started from post-colonial, I started to encounter the concept of decoloniality. Now in the Philippines, like similar to what Professor Day, I was taught that first post-colonial is the same with decoloniality. And there's no different. Well, especially I observed this when we presented the papers together with my colleagues. There are debates and confusion among us Filipinos. What is the difference of post-colonial or post-coloniality and decoloniality or decolonization? So basically, we are taught that post-colonial is public uprising, anti-imperialistic, revolutions, slave trade, border dispute, and physical displacement, as I quote Professor Day. This is basically my understanding of post-colonial or post-coloniality or post-colonization. However, there's no unified understanding of post-colonial or post-coloniality or post-colonialization in the Philippines. In fact, if you hear some, if they define and discuss post-coloniality, you will end up and you will sense and you will understand it is decoloniality. And others, if they attempt to explain or describe post-coloniality or the phenomenon of post-colonialization, it seems that it is not decoloniality. It is in contrast somehow to the project of decoloniality. Now, I agree with Professor Day. I think when we discuss this, we had these discussions in this forum, one-day forum, I told to myself when I read Mignolo and Hamid Dabashi and Quijano, I said, I think I agree with Professor Day. We need to decolonize the post-colonial thinking. Then I encounter this author, important author, Hamid Dabashi. I read this book, and this book basically responded to Santiago Zabala article, how he described the modern philosophy or the contemporary philosophy or the contribution of the European, not European, he never say that European, but the contemporary philosophers. However, Hamid Dabashi was disturbed and offended. He said that, why Santiago Zabala, when he mentioned the philosophy, he just only citing the European philosophers. Like for example, Judith Butler, Simon Critchley, Victoria Camps, Jean-Luc Nancy, Chantal Mouffe, Keanu Vatimo, Peter Sloterdijk, and of course, Slavoj Žižek. Although he mentioned Brazil, Australia, and China, but it's a name. Hamid Dabashi said, I think there's something wrong with this. This is very Eurocentric. Eurocentric articulations or to identify philosophy or to present philosophy. So according to this book, Hamid Dabashi illuminates and deconstruct the Eurocentric process of knowledge production. Obviously, when we say philosophy, when we do philosophy in our contemporary times, we always, or we must need first to go back and use the European references. And Dabashi was saying, I think it's time to reject this kind of approach in philosophy, in also as well as in other sciences. We need to use our own non-Western concepts and knowledge. I think especially India, you have very long history and you have rich culture, not only in terms of material culture, but also immaterial culture, such as knowledge production, ideas, philosophies. You are very rich with that. And then the question is, we think now in a similar fashion, I observed as a student of theology and religious studies, I said, in a similar fashion, this is also happening in the Christian theology. Like citing De La Torre in his book, later I will discuss that. But allow me to read this one. In a similar fashion, Christian theological systems suffer the same fate as one of the example of what they call the European theological pedigree. As a result, any non-Western theologies regarded as not part of the Christian theology properly on the top theology proper, and on top of that is retain the white privilege and white supremacy. Even in the theological production, in the idea of doing theology and ways of doing theology, according to De La Torre, white supremacy, racism, and privileged position by the Western European, American European knowledge is always accepted without question that they are the canon. Outside of that framework, you are not welcome to the mainstream of doing theology in the West. Even here in Europe, it's very hard to do theology as a color people. If you want to be legitimate and to be accepted, you need always to start with Karl Barth, Soren Kierkegaard, Martin Luther, etc. However, now scholars argue the problem is not only rooted, it is rooted, the problem is deeply rooted in the colonial power and the house of knowledge. The house of knowledge, it is a given. They think it's given, natural, that the Western theological canon or thinkers is the only source of doing theologies. Now, for the Christian theological system can be understood as carrying the legacy, according to DiAngelo and Dyson. What happened to the Christian theological system in our contemporary times? They become they facilitate this kind of supremacy as normal. However, scholars now by decoloniality and post-colonial scholars, they said, in order to challenge the colonial matrix of power using Mignolo and Quijano, also and De La Torre, it requires epistemic disobedience. Although they said now, I was also correct. I was also engaged by one of the best decolonial professor in Africa. He said that I think it's better to use the insurrection, no, disobedience or epistemic insurrection. Now, this is basically my framework, my working framework. So aside from the dark side of Western modernity, decoloniality, and of course the book of Zion Day that really flash out the essential concepts of decoloniality and coloniality and the complex power of coloniality. I admire how he simplified and put all things in order to grasp even the wider audience of this book. This book, different spaces and different voices. I highly recommend this. Now, basically, this is what Mignolo are trying to say. So perhaps you already know that better than me. Now, using this view of decoloniality, in the theological discussions, what would be decoloniality? What are the contributions of decoloniality when it comes to theological reflection? First, it provokes us to indulge a series of the hierarchical and indigenous exercise. meaning decoloniality challenged the concept of many concepts that promote hierarchy, justify hierarchy. Also, it value non-Western production of knowledge, like indigenous knowledge. Then you have of course, the most important is to start with yourself. The problem with now here, when most of Western scholars, when they organize conferences and training and consultations, they always organize among themselves. For example, I was really offended. 2017, there was a conference and assembly about African doing theology in Africa. Then, when I saw the program, they're all white, and only one African is there. Fortunately, at least one. When they do this kind of conference and consultation, debates about non-Western world, they never invited non-Western scholars. What actually I observed in my 4 years living here in Europe. So I will not go further with that because I have things still, because you already know that. Now, here, my definition of epistemic disobedience, including epistemic insurrection. First, I do believe, and I'm fully convinced with the decolonial thinkers like Professor Day and Mignolo and Quijano, that there's no such thing zero-point epistemology. Although, prior to this popularization or mainstreaming of this concept in contextual theology, also in Latin liberation theology, they already arguing and contending that there's no such thing universal approach or model that fit in all contexts about doing theology when it comes to epistemology. Well, aside from that, when we say that epistemic disobedience, I agree with Mignolo and Professor Day, it takes civil disobedience. Like Gandhi, Martin Luther, and King. Although I know you as Indian, I know you have many debates about Gandhi. Then I will leave you on that. I will not touch that because you are specialists and you know what actually Gandhi is doing and what the history actually of Gandhi. Then next, epistemic disobedience required delinking. What I found with this recent contemporary theories in social sciences, specifically in critical theories, including Slavoj Žižek, they delink, trying to delink, but they re-westernize again any ideas. But in epistemic disobedience, you need to delink in this Western system. Then, my understanding also, the epistemic disobedience or insurrection, it is always contextual, relational, practice-based, and lived. In theology now, we still struggling to reconcile the modern ways of setting in the level of education, system, because until now we are doing this systematic theology biblical theology, practical theology, we have this very departmentalized concept of theology. So if you do biblical theology, more or less, it's difficult for you to relate some biblical concept of the Hebrew concept, the Greek languages, learning Latin, German, Hebrew. It is difficult to discuss with these people what is the relevance of this knowledge to our contemporary times, especially in times of COVID-19, in times of neo-colonialization, in times of climate change. Then, of course, I agree with Mignolo that epistemic disobedience or insurrection, it is always critical and rejecting consumerist religion. I will further explain that later on. Or spirituality. Therefore, the westernizing or doing epistemic disobedience or insurrection, in the context of theology, it is always theology should start with the realities of the ground. What is the reality from the ground? Now I quote the Eatwood, which is a very progressive, very contextualized, post-colonial basically, but still I think decoloniality is not really clear among these people. Because I found many of the literatures produced by this Eatwood mean Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians. Most of them, they define post-colonial as decoloniality. So basically, for them, if you do the critical principle of doing theology in Asia, it should be based on plurality, diversity in races, peoples, culture, etc., etc. Second, most of the countries in the region, colonial experience. It should always address the colonial matrix, the administrative colonial influence, etc., etc. But as I said, this critical principle now is under revision. Now, what Christian, particularly my people, the Filipino Christians, can learn from epistemic disobedience or insurrection, generally speaking, decoloniality? First, it will de-Hellenize Christian theologies. What I experienced basically in my religious background, they're very dualist. They think that any public affairs tend to you to commit a sin. For example, in my organization, you know that we are not allowed to watch movie because the TV, they said, is the source of lying and ideology of the world. So don't feed your mind, your soul of the TV, the televisions. I mean, the TV means televisions. So for the Pentecostal, it will challenge the dualistic categories that we learn from the Western form of Christianity. Aside from that, it will challenge the common tendency of Pentecostal, including evangelicals and some Catholics, to withdraw from political social activities. And more or less, some of us in our group tend to be anti-intellectualist. They think that any formal education will destroy their knowledge of God. Then next, will the coloniality will de-Americanize, de-Hollywood, de-celebritize Christianity. I know you encounter some tele-evangelists in India. I also saw some popular tele-evangelists in India. So don't worry, because in the Philippines, we have similar phenomenon in the Philippines. So decoloniality can challenge contemporary Filipino Pentecostal, charismatic spirituality, which is basically individualistic and based on prosperity gospel. Then, of course, I just invented this term because I saw some decolonial. I think this is one of the critique of some Western scholars. They said, oh, decolonial always invented some terms. And I said, so what? So I used the white Sajon, the white Sajon, or the racialization. In Israel, most of our groups or members of our organization, and some evangelicals and some mainline Protestant believers, even Catholics, they think that the Jew, being Jew, are genetically based. That's why and this essentialist approach in identity, religious identity, they bring that international level. That's why they have the Zionist Jew. And unfortunately, using biblical idioms, they justify this. And this justification resulted to the privilege and supernatural rights of the state of Israel to grab, to stole the Palestinian lands. Of course, also another thing, according to De La Torre, the ideology of chosenness and ideology of exemptionalism. They said Israel, the modern state of Israel, especially the Zionist groups, I'm not anti-Jew. Me, I am anti-Zionist. Just to clarify, because sometimes they mix that, because of this essentialist view of identity. According to De La Torre, in his recent book, Burying, Resurrecting a White Badass Christian Privilege. So for him, this is very problematic. If you trace the Old Testament, you will find that many ideological, okay, by the way, De La Torre, including one of the Old Testament Christian scholar, Walter Brueggemann, using rhetorical criticism to read the Old Testament. And one of the approach of rhetorical criticism, one of the important approach of rhetorical criticism is the ideological criticism. Okay? They read the Old Testament and they found many ideological statements that need to be critically studied. Not just simply to accept, but as a Christian, as a Jew or member of Jewish community, religious community, or even Muslim scholar should become more conscious and critical. Why and why this biblical verses is included. There is always ideological element there. So it's not just simply, you know, the naive interpretations of the Old Testament. They said, hey, it's all the word of God. That is very, very passé and very medieval. Okay? It's not already accepted now in the biblical scholarship. I mean, contemporary scholarship, biblical scholarship. Because you have this ideological element that you need to be conscious and aware and need to be approached in a critical manner. For him, what is the alternative with these consumerist, white, supremacist Christians? They said we need badass Christianity. So since I will just perhaps if you want I can send you the PowerPoint, but for this time I will not read because I think Professor I think I still have how many minutes?
You have time.
Hello?
Please carry on.
I'll have time. Thank you, Professor. Now, for him, number one, this badass Christianity as an alternative to this white, capitalist, consumerist, materialistic, individualistic, supremacist, European, American loyalist is the badass Christianity. According to him, the decolonialization of liberating faith expression intended to upset the prevailing social order designed to maintain the neoliberal ideology. Unfortunately, many of Christian theologies now, including intercultural or interreligious models, are depoliticized. They focus more on cultural, social, psychological, etc. But they never discuss the political economy. They never challenge the political economy, especially the ideology of neoliberalism. For him, that is very unfortunate for him. Because one of the nature of Christian theology is prophetic. Prophetic means not in the spiritual, realm, but prophetic because it should address injustices. Theology should practice activism and protest and address concretely, actively, clearly the dominant ideology that justifies injustices, marginalization, oppression, human rights abuses or violations. Then it should be committed in radical solidarity. As I said, I mentioned, then belief in a cultural symbols connects to us to the deity. Because of the problem also with materialism, it's also problematic because for using decoloniality, that is also problematic if you superimpose of your being secular. And although we have diverse definition of secularity, what I mean by secular here is the Enlightenment project to delete or to privatize religion. That is very problematic for me. I will not read that detail by detail, okay? Then, this is one of my paper. I can send you the paper. I wrote the paper, my first publication, peer review publication. I wrote about this after my program in the IAPI when I do voluntary work on the IAPI in Westpark. When I went there for 3 months, we observe, we protect children, harassed by the IDF soldiers. So I think if decoloniality will take seriously by my fellow Christians, particularly Pentecostals, evangelicals, some Catholics, and etc., Baptists, Methodists, they need to desionize or desionization of the Christian theologies / eschatology, the end time teaching. Why? In this kind of framework, we call this dispensational theology. This dispensational theology basically justify the occupations, the ethnic cleansing, war in Middle East. This is embraced by the most Christian rights and conservative fundamentalist literalist Christians in the world, especially in the US. And this framework basically influence the foreign policy of the US toward Middle East. There are several studies conducted with this. I'm not inventing here, okay? This is common. Now, this framework, if you notice that Israel should be established in order, the modern state of Israel should be established. And the third temple should be rebuilt upon the Dome of the Rock. Then Jesus Christ will come, will arrive. You will hear this from the fundamentalist preachers, televangelists in the US, also in the Philippines. This is very unfortunate because this interpretation, it is distorting the biblical message. It is not biblical. It is based, they interpreted the Bible message using the current events. And that is very unacceptable among biblical scholars. Unfortunately, as I said, again, this is widely accepted among Christians. Now, it emerged among Christians, not only in the US and other parts of the world, due to COVID-19. Now, this is one of the important books that also discuss this, how these theologies influence the American foreign policy. Of course, you have these lobbyists in the US, the IPAC. They have this motto, I stand with Israel. God bless Trump from Jerusalem, DC. So you see how this theology shaped the contemporary Christian rights and their involvement in policy making when it comes to the Middle East. And this is one of the, I hate this guy, you know, Pastor Hagee. He's a very famous American preacher. I call this guy the prophet of doom because he's pushing America to war against Iran, to war against the Arab countries, to protect the so-called, the chosen people of God of Israel. And he said, that is the God said, that is the Christian God said. We need to watch because Jesus is coming soon. Unless America will kill all these Israel enemies, Jesus Christ will not come. So please, let's pray. Protect the America while they're going to commit another genocide. That's the ideology of this pastor in America, Pastor HADJE. Now next, of course, the patriarchal element inside of the church. Until now, we have still debates among theologians, missionaries, Bible teachers, biblical scholars about the woman ordinations. Of course, we need to decolonize the Christian eschatology. Unfortunately, this is a recent article that was published in the US in Guardian, and this is very unfortunate. Well, I think this is good because they see the hope and the message of God in the midst of COVID-19, the global pandemic. But also, unfortunately, this is very unfortunate because they never understand that the role of neoliberal that facilitate and benefited from this global pandemic, they never see that. They just simply say, this is the message of God to change our lifestyle, to change our thinking, but unfortunately, still, the social order is unaddressed. Now, according to this article, in the US, the virus has killed more than 8,000 Americans that caused economic hardship for millions. But these 80,000 Americans, most of them are color people. Okay. And the poll found that 31% of Americans who gave in God feel strongly that the virus is a sign of telling humanity to change. But I said, when it comes to political issues and economic issues, it's still unaddressed. Now my conclusion, well, this is working conclusion. In conclusion, of course, it is easy said than done. I think the challenge now for us as a Christian, especially me, are we ready? Are we ready to embrace decoloniality? To delink in our imperialistic impulse? Hermeneutics, evangelism, mission, and to acknowledge our Christian tradition have been kept hostage by colonial matrix of power, like that justify white supremacy, racism, modern slavery, support globalization, populist politics, hierarchy, colonialization, etc., and etc. I think the challenge is, are we ready as a Christian? Especially now in the Philippines, most of the grassroots Christians support Duterte, war on drugs. That is very unfortunate to hear and to observe that. Imagine the grassroots, not the, of course, systematic theologian or informed or educated individuals, the middle class. Some of them, or many of them, also justifying, supporting Duterte's regime. But I think in terms of large-scale support, it comes from the grassroots. So I think that is the challenge. So thank you very much, and I hope I'm excited to hear your comment, your criticism, your suggestions, and contributions. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hadje. There are a lot of messages in the chat box talking about your extensive research that you have done. And based on this research, you have made this presentation. So credit goes to the extensive research and the wide study that you have made in the course of this, analysis of this particular field of decolonization from theological perspective. Now, I have had now a lot of questions. Can I just ask you, Hadje, to just stop your presentation so that we can have you in the full screen?
Yes, Professor, of course. Wow.
There are a lot
What?
of thank you, congratulations messages in the chat box.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. And actually, honestly, now, I want to say this, Professor. It is my dream to come in India and to visit your Ganga River. Because, you know, I love old civilization that are full of rich culture and knowledge. And that is one of my major agenda someday. And I want to mention my friend, Abani is here, brother.
Yeah, now you are most welcome to India. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how clean will the Ganga be to welcome
I
you.
know that issue, but I don't care. I still respect the place.
But there are areas in India where you can have clear crystal Ganga water. That's for sure.
Okay.
I can guide you. Even Sign also can guide you.
Thank you.
And we have a concept in India called Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, you know. It's a Sanskrit word, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This means that, we welcome, the world is a part of us, and we welcome each and every participant, each and every living being on this earth to our country. We are a Kutum. Kutum means we are related.
Wow. I love that concept.
We are related somewhere or the other. So we believe welcoming, and we are very, very warm in such things.
Professor, do you know that the reason why I convinced my wife to give me this hour, because I promised her, don't worry, these people will invite us in India, because her dream is to come in India and to visit Taj Mahal.
My God. Yeah, Taj Mahal is a beautiful place, and I have had the opportunity of visiting twice. And India is very huge, you know.
Yeah, it's a continent. I know that. It's a continent.
Kind of. So, yeah, I have had the opportunity of working with some of Philippine friends when I was in Bangkok. I was there, working there. And in the English department, I had some Filipinos, and as you asked about the food and all, so we had some very good relations. And I was there, and our department mainly, most of us had a heterogeneous mixture. So so Filipinos were there. I had some Filipino colleagues who guided me, helped me. So I have very good impression about Philippines and the people of Philippines.
Thank you.
I'm saying all these things so that our participants know a little bit about Philippines and Filipino people, and because the way,
Indian food.
the way you are interacting, the way you are open, the participants might be confused. So just to, some of the participants, just to give them an idea that Filipinos are very warm in their welcome like us, and they're very expressive. They are very expressive. So so there is a participant called Jaba Kusum Singh, who is with us in this thing. She says that I live near Agra Taj Mahal. I will be glad to guide you. I will be glad to guide you to Taj Mahal.
Please. God bless you.
So there's one more participant. He says that we Indian hosts treat the guests like God. So
I heard that.
Sort of like we welcome people. That's it. That's the crux of the matter. Now coming back to the questions, I have many questions, but some of the questions I have I would like to highlight and place in front of you. The first question is from Professor Muhammad Akram. He is an associate professor in Pakistan.
Oh yeah, good.
His question is, first of all, he has an observation, and that is that this is a new dimension of post-colonialization, interestingly presented by HADJE CRESENCIO. Now his question is there any theological system other than Christian and Jewish which carries the legacy of colonialistic ways of thinking and physical displacement in the contemporary world?
Okay, I believe yes, but I hope I know that. I have a knowledge of. Well, I think in the Philippine context, we have this non-Christian and non-Jewish system of thought, which is we call it pre-colonial worldview. And I think India, you have a lot of this, pre-colonial worldviews or system of thought. In the Philippines, we have a lot. But unfortunately, because of the globalization, the market is very strong in the Philippines that also influence our curriculum. I think when it comes to this kind of discussion or discourse, I think only few people can only explore this kind of discussion or knowledge, especially the community development workers in Mindanao. They discover, because I grew up also in Mindanao, which is the Muslim area in the Philippines, which is also, they said there's a religious conflict, but that is superficial, of course. It always the issue of land corruptions among the national government and marginalization of the minority groups, including Muslims and non-Muslim indigenous groups. Well, I think yes. I do believe. Because Christianity, the Christian system of Christian, thought and Jewish thought is only recent. Only recent. Very recent. In fact, I think 75% is modern construction and Western construction.
Dr. Afifa Bano, she is a lecturer in University of Bisha, Saudi Arabia. Her question is, what is your take on white supremacy cyber racism?
Cyber racism.
Cyber racism, yes. Cyber, C-Y-B-E-R, cyber racism.
Oh, that's very interesting, Professor. I never still explored that topic, but yeah, thank you for that. Well, honestly, yeah, as I said, I'm still not explored that topic, but that is very interesting. But of course, white racism it has a lot of form. It has a lot of form, especially in the mass media right now.
Next question is by Binoy Dangar. He is from Murshidabad. Murshidabad is basically in West Bengal, the eastern part of India.
Mm-hmm.
His question is, what is your opinion about the eradication of prejudiced religious practices from the human society throughout the world?
Eradication of prejudices.
Prejudiced religious practices.
Religious practices? That's a very good question. I don't know. I have no idea, actually. But for me, it starts with education. Start with education, empowerment. I think if that will happen, I think that is very good. No? That is just and humane society, But I hope, to give you a generic answer, because that is a very wide question, but very important also, Professor. But honestly, I don't know. I don't know. I hope. I think that I'm also looking for. I'm also looking for on that someday that will discrimination or prejudices will be discriminated. But as I said, from the decolonial perspective, it should be start to ourself before projecting it to others.
Muhammad Aslam Parvez. His question is, sir, you are an expert in the conflict study of Israel and Pakistan. How is the conflict going to end to save human loss?
2 weeks na lang.
Sorry, Prof. Sorry, Prof. Could you please repeat the question again?
The question is, Muhammad Aslam's question. You are an expert in the conflict study of Israel and Palestine. How is this conflict going to end to save human loss?
Well, bro, that's a very good question. Me, honestly, as long we have this white supremacy embedded in the Western powers, I think the conflict between Israel and Palestine will never end. Because the state of Israel is yearly, they got $1 billion for their military expenditures. So I think for me, once the America, become they realize that it is injustices, because they said Israel, the modern state of Israel, is the American extension in the Middle East. So for me, as long the Western powers like Germany, France, will benefit this kind of geopolitical issues or geopolitical politics, I think it will never end.
The next question is from Mr. Bishwajit Mandal. His question is, if we decolonize the white knowledge, what will be the leading?
Professor, I lost you.
Yeah, there were some internet issues. Mr. Bishwajit Mandal's question is, if we decolonize the white knowledge, what will be the leading knowledge? Because if we prioritize a specific knowledge, then similarly, there would be the agency of that particular section of being. Am I audible? Hello? Am I audible?
Yeah. Okay. Now you're okay now.
Okay. So a question is,
Professor, can you kindly repeat? Yeah.
If we decolonize the white knowledge, what will be the leading knowledge? Because if we prioritize,
Copy.
Am I audible? Hello?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Okay.
The question is, if we decolonize the white knowledge, what will be the leading knowledge? Because if we prioritize a specific knowledge, then similarly there would be the agency of that particular section of being.
Yeah, I think that is a very good question. I think that is the challenge for decolonial scholars or thinkers. because you don't need to repeat the logic of the colonial the logic of coloniality. Okay, and also it doesn't mean if you we decolonize the Western white knowledge, it doesn't mean you eradicate them, but you are promoting an equal treatment or space that they need to consider you as an equal interlocutor, not just simply a receiver of their knowledge production. So that's not the goal of decoloniality as far as I know. So you just simply trying to perhaps using Paulo Freire to help them to acknowledge that you are also human and thinker, and your knowledge and experience is also valuable in our conversation or in the production of knowledge. But of course, that is not very simple because you have these power relations.
Next
so if they will treated their Western knowledge as a universal, important, they should also acknowledge our non-Western knowledge and experience and ideas as a universal. And valid.
Next question is by Renuka Sahu. She's a PhD research scholar. Her question is, there's hierarchy in language where English is at upper hand and other regional or indigenous languages are at bottom. Can we say...
I think not audible.
Audible?
Yeah, now. It's okay now.
Yeah. So the question is, there is a hierarchy in language where English is at the upper hand and other regional or indigenous languages are at bottom. Can we say if we are indulged in de-hierarchical activities, we should also think of language?
So the question is,
Hello? Hello? Am I audible? Yeah. Am I audible?
Okay. Now, yeah.
The question is, there is a hierarchy in language where English is at the upper hand and other regional or indigenous languages are at bottom. Can we say, if we are indulged in de-hierarchical activities, we should also think of language?
Okay, so the question is, yeah, I heard you, but what is the question there?
The question is that when we are talking of decolonization, suppose, when we are talking of de-hierarchical activities, don't you think that apart from the norms and all these decolonization that you're talking about, language also should be included as one of the components of decolonization? Because English is occupying everywhere as the premier language, as the language of the West, dominating everywhere. Hello? Hello. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah, no, it's okay na. Okay. I miss again the last part of your question. Sorry, Professor. I think the internet, the connection is fluctuating.
Yeah. The question is that when we are talking of decolonization, when we are talking of hierarchy, so don't you think we should also talk of language perspective, because English is occupying that hierarchical
Of course.
thing.
No. Of course. Do you know in Germany? There are words that how they describe foreigners? If you hear that sound, you feel very offended because the word, how they pronounce the word, how they spell the word, and the sound of the word is very, how do you will feel you are not welcome. Despite that they are saying you're welcome, but using that word to describe you as a foreigner, it makes you realize that you are not still a local, despite that you live there for 10 to 20 years. So I agree, decolonization in language is very, very important. But we need also not to forget that language is also socially and culturally embedded. So don't forget, if you decolonize language, that is very important. Don't forget also to address the socio and political economic aspect of the language.
The other question is, this is the last question we are taking today.
Oh yeah.
Do you think religion is the alternative weapon for the Westerners to show their supremacy over the non-Westerners apart from English as a language?
Yeah, I agree. Yes. I think there were times that religion is a very, very powerful tool to subjugate the non-Western civilizations. But of course, there are many nuances when we discuss about religion and the use of religion in colonialization. Because we need to be careful. Because sometimes, as I said, religion is also a victim of colonialization.
Thank you. Thank you, HADJE, for taking out your
Thank you
valuable
very
time
much.
and working very hard on
I'm
your.
still okay to extend. Just tell me, I'm still okay to extend.
No, what I want to say is that we will have you in the near future also. It was a pleasure having you from the entire team Gnosis. We are
Yeah.
really thankful. The participants, there are a plethora of messages. If you say that they are congratulating you for the kind of research that you are putting in, for the effort that you are putting in, and of course this has added a new dimension of decolonization today, which we witnessed
Of
in
course.
the lecture. And it was a pleasure having you, and look forward for such more engaging lectures in the near future, HADJE. This is from
Yes.
Dr. Shoykot Banerjee and team of entire Gnosis. Thank you so much. Yes, HADJE.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. And thank you,
Uh,
guys.
yeah,
Thank you
take
very
care.
much,
Take
Professor and
care.
doctors.
Thank
God bless
you.
you. Take care.
Thank you, participants. Take care. Bye. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.